Hey y'all, welcome to the T-Work podcast, hosted by Grant Banko and me, Adam Moreau. From entrepreneurs and athletes to the rat racers of corporate America and those who refuse to be put in a box, we want to share their stories and understand how they ended up where they are. Success and development come in many shapes and sizes. We want to hear about it all. So grab a drink and pull up a seat. Let's spill some tea and get to everyone. Welcome back to the T-Work podcast. Joining Banko and I today is Lance Brozdowski, the player development analyst for Marquee Network. That I don't even think begins to describe what Lance does for the baseball and sports world. Previously worked with Driveline, does some awesome stuff on YouTube. Pretty much if you're in the baseball world and you're trying to get smarter, you've probably seen Lance's face on Twitter, Instagram. I don't know if he does TikTok. I know he has Substack. He's got damn near everything. So if you want to learn something in the baseball world, you pretty much go through Lance if it comes with ball movement or pitcher analytics. So Lance, thanks for joining us today. Can't wait to hear about how you got to this point because you were an accountant. So this is quite the journey that you've taken. But yeah, thanks a ton on behalf of both of us. I'll just kick it over to you for the quick little bio.
Yeah. So I work for the Chicago Cubs Regional Sports Network. So if you're on the East Coast and you're like a Yankee fan, yes, network. Marquee is like the equivalent of that out in the Midwest for the Cubs. So I'm a player development analyst there. I'm also like a producer. The player development analyst title is like kind of my on-air title. So I have my own segment on our pregame shows, usually a couple times a week, that is focused on broaching more like analytically driven topics with whoever our talent is that day. So I work with like Cliff Floyd, and we had a lot of Dexter Fowler in this year. Ryan Dempster has been a huge mentor of mine, great friend when we first started up doing segments with me and stuff. So I like discussing complex topics with people who know more than me. That's maybe like the best way to summarize kind of how I approach, I think, a lot of baseball generally. And it's been a blast. It's been a wild ride. So I'm sure we'll get into it.
For sure. Well, I know we are a little bit limited on time. I am going to start with baseball, then we'll back it up.
Cool.
So, when did you start making, I guess, the more educational videos? And was that something for the public or was that kind of to just help you?
Oh, good. Yeah, you caught it. It's primarily for me to like make sure I can communicate something. So I feel like I learn through regurgitation. I imagine most people do. Like teaching is one of the best forms of learning. So I mean, I have a lot of conversations with people in the sport. Kind of tried to grow that Rolodex over the last couple of years, and I think I've done an okay job of it. There's a lot of people that I talk to that I think if I flash back 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and was like, "You're going to be talking to that person consistently," I'd be like, "That is really cool. I can't wait." And so yeah, I mean, I really value those conversations and connections and just asking them complex questions. And most of the time, getting the response that I'm overthinking things. But it's fine. Like I guess that's my job to some extent to overthink because I guess that entertains. But yeah, the educational stuff is definitely primarily for me to like distill a topic down and see if I can communicate it as effectively as possible rather than being purely educational. I think if it was purely educational, I would be doing stuff like who's the guys at Simple Sabermetrics on YouTube. They do a great job, where they like break down WOBA and stuff. That's what I would go towards if I was trying to be truly educational. But instead, I'm in this weird hybrid area where you probably got to know some baseline baseball stuff to totally be able to appreciate what I'm doing. But um, if you get to that baseline level of info, then I hope I'm bringing some value.
Well, I can even tell you how I got exposed to you initially is a guy you brought up prior to us recording, Barton Smith. I was trying to understand seam shifted wake and the effects the air has on the baseball. I watched a bunch of his videos and then was scrolling through YouTube and found a Lance Brozdowski breakdown on seam shifted wake. I was like, oh, that's the same concept in English. Now I can finally understand what Barton's talking about.
Barton's the man. Yeah, I've had a couple like DM conversations with him and chatted about stuff. And he works for a team, so it's a little unfortunate that I think I had a question for him a while back, and he was like, "I fortunately can't answer that." And I was like, "Man, I've lost like the primary seam shifted way contact to be able to like bounce ideas off." But yeah, that's the key, right? Like I think at the end of the day, I mean, you played and stuff. I didn't play at a high level, but like people are like the people digesting this info on the R&D side are not the ones that are then going to be able to communicate to the player most effectively. So I almost feel like I bridged that gap to some extent, or at least try to, where I resonate maybe more with the player or the coach who isn't the person in the R&D ripping through models and stuff. And that's probably where I've carved out as much of a niche as you would like to describe in this wide world of baseball.
And I will just jump in. I played baseball at a high level, and Adam's comment of what he was looking for on YouTube, I have no idea what he's talking about. So if you're listening to this and are very confused, so am I. So don't worry about trying to understand that. That is Adam's and Lance's world. It is not majority of Americans or any other listeners' world. But Lance, I
It's
guess
simple. Banko, I gotta interrupt. It's how airplanes fly through the air. It's the exact same thing. So if you understand how airplanes fly, you can understand how a baseball moves. You'll be fine.
The way I'd phrase it even simpler than that is like, I don't know if you're a four seam, two seam guy, but like if you ripped a four seam and then your coach was like change orientation, throw a two seam, throw it the exact same way. The reason that ball moves differently is because of the orientation you're using. And it's just like the idea and science behind what orientation is changing the ball flight, you know? Like a lot of pitches are like that, right? Like just you throw it the same way, throw the crap out of it. It's a fastball and we're just changing the grip. And it's like, well, why is the ball moving differently? It's like that seems the way.
that was a better way to describe it than Adam's, because who knows how an airplane flies? I just get
Yeah,
in a
that was
plane
the
and it goes.
joke, Banko. It's the point. That's the point. I know this isn't simple.
But let me take a step back here, Lance. You have an outgoing personality. Adam mentioned you're an accountant, though. So how does an outgoing personality that is now assumably on TV and talking and has a decent personality to connect with people become an accountant?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I've always enjoyed business and metrics and numbers. I've been comfortable around numbers, and I think that drove me into it. Like I thought I wanted to do business adjacent stuff, so I went into undergrad at UMass Amherst undeclared for like 2 years, and then at the end of my sophomore year, I had to declare. And for some reason, I went accounting. I don't know if it was stability. I actually did very much enjoy, I think, the baseline course material there for the first 2 years. And even through college, I didn't mind it. You know, I took a bunch of sport classes. Basically, the only mentor I still have from college is a sport individual in their master's in sports management program. And UMass actually has some pretty good alum. We have like Chris Antonetti and I believe Ben Sherrington and some others. So there's a lot of like really high up people who went through that sport management program. But for some reason, I was just like the person. I'm like, I think my mentor, I'll shout him out, Will Norton, who's still there. He said that I'm like the adopted son of the sport department because whenever they like, he brings me up occasionally, and it's like he's a former sport graduate. I'm like, I'm not actually. I didn't graduate from your program. I graduated from the accounting department, and he's always like perplexed. But uh, I just hated it immediately when I got into the field. I worked for one of the big four accounting firms, and it's just one of those really basic things where the second you graduate college and you get into a job, you're like, I can work 60 hours a week here. You know, accounting is busy, especially like pre-tax season and stuff, and was just like, oh, okay. Like if I want to work this much, like I got to be remotely interested in what I'm doing. Like I got to be more motivated. And I was like going home every night in watching baseball, trying to start to create some kind of content and stuff. So I just had to stay in the field for a couple of years to save up some money and stuff. Um, and so I was there for like 3.5 years in the city of Boston at a big four firm, and then very quickly left, abruptly left. And just made a really hard pivot by going to journalism school for a graduate program at Medill Northwestern. So that's where I'm at.
And how did you figure out that you wanted to go into journalism straight from that? Like, was it just testing out things, like talking to people? How did that come about?
Yeah, I don't know. I've always really enjoyed again like the communication of things and like learning. And I don't know why I've never really had too much drive. Although you could argue this has maybe changed lately to some extent of like working for a team. You know, like I just for some reason I've always enjoyed the more open-ended communicating with people. I don't know if it's because when I was in school and also in accounting, I was very much consuming all that content. And I was like, wow, it'd be really cool to like create this kind of content for people, you know? And I don't know. I've always been somewhat resistant to working with an organization. I just feel like more of an edge perhaps has been one of the more recent rationales I've had for it, where it's like there aren't a lot of people trying to like be a nerd analytic communicator on television in baseball, I would argue. Whereas like if you go into a team, like I don't really have high level playing experience. I'm not a good coder. You know, I don't have any of these really hard skills that I know or differentiate. I'm not a biomechanist. I'm not a physicist. So I just thought I had more of an edge. Like my elevator pitch of myself in this industry, I thought was much more attractive from like an upside standpoint. So that's what I've been trying to do over the last couple of years is really pound that is like I'm pretty confident there's no one else trying to do what I'm trying to do. And maybe that changes. I hope in like 10 years we look back and there's a bunch of people like this. You know, I feel like we're getting this switch in football a bit where I was watching like the Netflix broadcast where they had like a bazillion people But Mina Kimes was incredible. And I think that we're getting to the point where, because we've become so hyper niche in a lot of content, that people who like the playing experience, I think, is vital, especially that color to a broadcast. But I do think in like the studio sense, or just in the general content sense that isn't in the game, I'm not entirely sure how like necessary playing experience is. I think it's important, very important, but it's not like the entire desk of four people should all be former players. Like there's got to be more like Mina Kimes in the world where, she crushed it. She had the best notes of anybody on that panel, and there was like Manti Te'o and all these other people, and I'm like, I don't care what they're saying. Like, I'm not learning anything, you know. And I understand that my perspective is a little bit different, I think, than other people, but I just think we're getting to the point, especially with how niched down content has become, that you got to be like really good at a very specific thing, and that's what I've tried to be with public-facing pitching analysis, I guess.
I think you bring up a great point there. I guess I can only speak on how I watch sports, but I watch sports for kind of like the game within the game, as I'm sure most former athletes do. So I enjoy listening to those breakdowns. I don't want to hear about, I don't know, the culture or how much these guys care. They just want it more. No, I want to know how the spin of the ball is impacting its movement. Or in football, like I like those like fancy now. I forget what they're even called, but like the insider stats, like all that extra stuff where you're just like, holy shit, this is the most athletic person that has ever done anything on the face of the earth, and we can now measure that. I want the breakdown on that. So like yeah, fans have more education than ever too, or they have more access to it. So now you can kind of be the liaison, as far as I'm concerned, for the more educated fan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's a key point you mentioned, like fans have more information than ever. That is very accurate. I think that causes the standard of like research and understanding and thought on in content creation to be elevated a lot. And that's kind of where I thought I fit in, where it's like I think I fit in that area where it's like, you can't carry a show by saying the generalities that everyone's heard for the last 10 years on a broadcast. We're just getting to the point where fans are too sharp. Like they'll be able to sniff out your BS if you're saying something that isn't totally researched or is purely anecdotal. And again, it's not to take away from like those perspectives having value. Like I learned a ton from older school coaches that like don't care about seam effects and seam shifted awake and stuff. And I find value in that. I just think it's not balanced in how content has been created, especially from like a what gets the most exposure standpoint. But we're seeing this tide shift, like John Boy and Foolish Baseball and like all these content creators are really smart. And I think that they're surpassing the generation. Like they're honed in on that generation that will eventually ascend. And I don't think put up with like the current state of a lot of analysis, which isn't particularly sharp. And it's just, throwing stuff at the wall and like bringing up anecdotal experiences and stuff. So this is my bet. You got to make bets in life, right? And that's my bet.
I guess for my perspective, and I guess anybody listening to this, how much preparation goes into each show for you? Because it's not just show up and I know this stuff off the top of my head. Like you said, there's notes that are put together per show. Like how much preparation, how much time do you put in before even going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. The segments I do are a little more like encapsulated. So like our show will be 45 minutes of airtime and I'll have like 10 minutes of it. Or occasionally I'll be in the entire show as well. For like the entire show, more prep. For my individual segment, I would say it's maybe like a couple hours. It's not a ton. And I think that's a byproduct of the fact that a lot of the time I'm like thinking about this stuff and coming up with perspectives. So it's kind of like the faucet is always on in my brain thinking about these things. And like the Substack's a byproduct of that as well. Like I try to do that every night during the season. And that just like keeps me thinking and keyed in on when things then come up in life, in these settings where I need to talk about so and so and I don't need to spend an hour researching it. I can just quickly I remember maybe what I talked about the guy, but I also made a video on him or I did a Substack post on him and I have all this info really quick that I could go to and use. And it's like, great, I'm already, in 10 minutes I was able to do an hour of prep because I already did that hour of prep. I just did it a bit ago. So I view it much more like a flow where it's like I'm constantly thinking and ideating and have ideas and researching and building and making such that I can then when I'm talking about something, I can pull that stuff in. I can like retrieve it and make my points off that. So it's tough for me to like really put an exact time on it, you know? For the draft, that's a good example though. I did the draft for MLB Network last year on like the side desk, and I was definitely more like the analytics guy talking about pitching and stuff. And I get into the draft, but I'm not too much of like an amateur college guy. So that prep was somewhat terrifying. It was the most prep I think I've done in a very long time. Where like I had to go, I didn't know any of the players, you know, like I had to do it so early because they're like, you got to be good to go on draft day, you know, you got to know everything. Like if I reference a conference wrong or this team, like I had to kind of get a baseline of like how college baseball works. Such I didn't say anything dumb, you know, like say a conference is better than it was or misspeak on a player's coach interact, like how a team handles their pitchers, like stuff like that. I had to get a big baseline up. So that prep was like 2 months, most nights spending probably anywhere from an hour and a half after I got off work to just like really compound all these ideas I had and make sure I had thoughts, you know? Because it's not like I was looking at like Yandy Diaz, where it's like you think Yandy Diaz and you're like, oh yeah, the guy who like couldn't lift the ball for a while and was able to lift the ball a bit and get really good plays. Like I had all that information on the college guys. You give me like even a Hagen Smith at the time, I was like, I don't even know who he plays for. You know what I mean? So it's like it was kind of intimidating to me to some extent. And I was surprised that they wanted me for that because my forte was not college baseball or anything or amateur baseball. But I learned a ton about what to do with those metrics and how complex they are and what to rely on and what teams look for. I made a lot of calls and talked to a lot of people about like, hey man, this guy's averaging 23 inches of vert on their fastball. Like nobody in MLB has that wide. He's like, oh, okay, the ball's just completely different in college. And then it's different when you get to the minors and it's different when you get to the majors. So that has a huge implication on things. So it's just a lot of like learning about these nuances that I just never even thought of. So that was like the most prep I've probably done for anything in my career was like continually prepping every night for that. Because I was terrified that I was just going to say something dumb or I have no idea what I was talking about. And the data was confusing too. It's like, oh, this guy in some random conference in I don't know, he picked this really like Presbyterian college and it's like he dominated and it's like, okay, but the stuff isn't great. It's like, oh, he had good command, but like, did he actually have good command? Or like, did everyone just swing out of the zone? And you have to tell him like, how good are these hitters? It's like so much more complex than say major league to triple A hitters to double A hitters and contextualizing that. This was like conference to conference, park to park. It was wild. So it was kind of a mess, honestly, and a lot of panic nights where I was up to like 2 a.m. going like, I don't know if this fastball matters. Is it good? He played in a terrible conference. He's got a 2.5 ERA. He struck out 130 batters in 90 innings, and his fastball shape stinks. And like, I don't know. Is this going to be good in the majors? Who knows? So that was basically what I was doing for a while.
So you have a completely newfound respect for mid-major college recruiting coordinators.
I can't even imagine, man. I can't even imagine. We were just at Wake conferences seminar, like Arizona baseball, and Wake Forest did the prior year, and they talk through like how they go through guys on and like the waiver market. I don't know. It's not called the waivers. Is it called the waivers?
Transfer portal.
Transfer portal. That's my bad.
It's the same thing.
Same thing. But like, yeah, that's like, I can't even imagine doing that stuff, man. Like that is basically come up with a matrix of teams that like the pitching department had no clue, you know? Would like and I actually talked to some of the majors who said that their team internally has like a list of like 5 to 10 teams that they know are completely clueless. So they're like, they know this guy's never been on like a proper strength program or tried a specific couple slider grips. So like if they kind of like the baseline release tricks they see in velo, they'll grab him because they just know that they can get a guy that jumps up and they're getting value at that draft slot. So that's what I would do. If it was like a recruiting coordinator or something, I would like look at all the bad teams. Like, is this coach terrible at doing anything from an optimization standpoint? And we will scoop him up and bring him over. Like Sean Sullivan's a great example. No offense to Northwestern, where I graduated from, but like they didn't know what they were doing with him. And Wake Forest picks him up and makes him, what was he, a third rounder? What did he get, like a mill or something like that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
all I know is he went through the early minor leagues and didn't allow a hit in his first 3 outings of low A or something like that.
He's a unicorn, man. He's got a wacky fastball.
Now.
Exactly. So I don't know. I definitely have a respect for those people for sure.
I will just jump in and say you casually kind of drifted over it by saying you have a 10-minute segment, but your prep is still a couple hours. To a lot of people, that is a lot of prep for 10 minutes of airtime. And also the other point I would point out is it's always running in your head. I'm assuming you lose some sleep or come up with an idea or come up with a thought in the middle of the night and wake up and have to get it out of your head somehow. So I just want to take a step back and say, it's not as casual as you were making it sound it is. It's still a lot of work that you're putting in for a 10-minute segment. So props to you.
Appreciate that. Yeah, no, I mean it's I guess that is a lot. I didn't actually know what like the proper answer is there, but yeah, I mean I'm on air and I'm coaching the segment as well as being analyst. So like I'm not only like building it out from a graphical standpoint, I'm also thinking about how I transition, what questions I ask. So it's like I kind of wish, I kind of hope long term I just become the analyst and I lose some of the host tendencies where it's like, welcome in, like I'm throwing to this, I'm tossing to that, and I have people in my ear. It's like I just want to make my point, you know? It's like I do much better when it's like I'm on deck alone, someone is hosting, being like the traffic cop, and they're just teeing me on what I want to be teed on that I can nail. And like that's the dream is just to be like more analyst, pure analyst. So then I can condense my time down into like really good points, make sure my graphics back me up, and like really think of it from like a story perspective of what story am I trying to tell with the pitcher. But the host analyst stuff gets tough. So that's probably where the hour, I'd probably say most of that hour or so goes into like me making sure I can like have the cadence of what I'm going to say in my head rather than like actually the analysis of like, what do I want to point out with his usage here? It's like I probably know the usage trend or the shape trend I'm talking about. And then it becomes a matter of like, how am I delivering it in a 10-minute segment such that it makes sense?
I'm glad you segued into that. And I guess, Banko, good job for you for guiding us here, because that was the question that I was going to follow up my recruiting coordinator joke about. But I wanted to know how much time you are spending with your prep on actually going through kind of the conversation, the process with everybody around you versus you
Mm.
preparing your own report.
I'm very, I guess you could call me like vertically integrated. I think maybe the really bougie word to use, but I'm basically doing almost all of it myself. Like I'm ideating, then I'm building out, I'm telling the producer like how exactly I want this to work, like when to pull up certain graphics or videos, and then also then delivering it, which is I think is relatively unique in the media space. Like usually the producer is telling the talent what to do. I'm more telling the producer for my segment specifically in this individual one. If I'm on a whole show, it's definitely much more give and take. But if it's just my 10-minute segment, it's like the entire thing is me. It's like my idea with the flow. Here's the video elements we want. Here's what I want graphically. And then like whoever's the talent that day, I'll sometimes like run it by them and see if they have a point. I'll use their feedback. So like Carlos Payne, we have him in. I love talking hitting with him. So I make sure like I don't finish the segment before I talk to him, if that makes sense. Like I'm gonna talk to him, bring up this idea, like, hey, I want to talk about matching playing on a big super flat four seam. And then he's got 2 points, 3 points. And I'm like, great, let's bring that in. Sometimes though, like I'll bring up stuff and the talent won't be as into it. I won't mention names or anything, but that's just the reality of the business. Like I really want to talk about something. And I think it's a really good topic. And the talent's like, man, I don't really think this matters. And I'm like, cool, just like hang out with me for a sec. Just BS me. You know what I mean? Just have fun. And in that case, it's much more like all me and stuff. So but yeah, when I get talent interaction or talent disagrees, which is hard to do, really hard to do on TV. I don't think a lot of people like disagreeing on TV, which is, I guess, the nature of the beast. Like you want to be very cordial, but Cliff Floyd is the guy I could get to disagree with me almost all the time, and those are the best segments because like I'm confident in what I'm saying, he's confident in what he's saying, and it's like it's a really good debate. Not to take a shot at Joe Girardi, but I love Joe. He's my guy. He does more prep than anybody I've ever run into on the talent side. He's literally in there like an hour before I'm in. And it's like Joe, you gotta go home, man. Like you gotta chill out. But he crushes prep, but he's really hard to get to disagree with me on air, which is I always find kind of frustrating. Like even if we disagree in our pre-production meeting, like I'm talking it through with him, and I'm like, great, I finally found a topic to disagree with you on. He'll then like kind of change his perspective in the show, and it's like, no, like you gotta stick it to me, man. Like tell me I'm wrong here. So I always have fun with him on that respect, but it's hard. Disagreement is hard. It's somewhat uncomfortable on air. You gotta be really like there's got to be some cohesion and respect between the individuals to get that to work, and it's difficult.
On that, how hard was it the first time you actually did disagree with somebody on air and to actually have the confidence to sort of back up what you were saying, or did you sort of back down since it was the first time it's happening?
Oh man, it's tough. Yeah, I think it took me a while because like it was hard to find my groove, and I don't know when I became confident enough to tell like Cliff Floyd that I disagree with him on a point. But that just came about at some point in the last probably year or two. Whereas like the first year of me doing stuff was much more me just being like a deer in headlights, where I just kind of like was giving away too much info. That's always my problem from like a self-criticalness standpoint is like reduction. Like I have 4 points I want to make, and it's like for some reason in my head, whenever I'm prepping stuff, it's like if I don't get all 4 of these in, this segment stinks. And it's like actually, if you just do one of those things, it'll be really good. And it's like that flow is always like the watered oil in my brain, where it's like I want to jam it as much as I can because I feel like I establish credibility through like information rather than like a resume. So it's like I always feel like I'm like I need to get in this, I need to get in that, and it's like no, like the best segments are the ones where it's like I make one very good clear point and then like I kind of back off and like have discussion. So I've been trying to get a lot better with like reducing things down even more than I do perhaps in other situations. So
I know we're gonna have to let you go, which sucks. I do know for a fact that that right there is going to be one of the clips that Banko pulls from this episode.
which one? Oh God, what I
That
say?
We'll
was
see.
great.
We'll
The
see.
reduction. I mean, that's
Yeah.
applicable to
Okay, that's a good one. That's a
anyone.
good one. That's a great one. Yeah. Great. I thought you were gonna take like an embarrassing one. Me
No,
calling out
Maybe.
Joe
We'll see.
Girardi or something. No.
no,
I
Lance.
don't think he has social media though, so he's not gonna do it.
What's great about that though is that's applicable to anyone
It's true.
beyond
Yeah.
your industry. I would say anybody that feels like they're playing imposter a little bit, or they might not have the same resume as somebody else. They always want to find a way to prove that they belong.
Yeah.
And as you said, you don't have the playing experience that Cliff Floyd has, or
Not even
Ryan Dempster, or any of these
0.2%.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to show that you know something that they don't, or maybe that's what it feels like. Because let's face it, like we're all competing, whether we think we are
Yeah.
or not. But you guys are on the same team. You're creating a good, productive environment for the fan or the viewer to learn something and go into the game thinking like, "Whoa, never thought of that before." Like this is the most
Yeah.
entertaining prep I have ever done to go watch my Cubs play a baseball game. So
Exactly.
I thought that was a great segment to end on. I know, fortunately, we have to let you go,
We'll
but
have to do this
now
again
that you
for sure.
were on, this means you have to come back whenever
Of
we want.
course. That's the deal. I will happily do that. It'll be great.
Well, we'll say our goodbyes. And Banko and I, we did this once before. We had a little debrief after we
Yeah.
lost our
Okay.
guest early. So, Lance, thanks a ton. I
Great
know it
meeting
was
you
a
guys.
quick
Great
one.
meeting you. Yeah.
Good to meet
Not
you,
you, Adam.
Lance.
I know you, Adam, but Grant. Yeah.
Whatever, man.
All right. See you guys. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Appreciate
Peace.
it.
All right, Banko, what'd you learn?
Yeah, I mean, you basically stole what I was going to say at the end there. I was like, we could go down the rabbit hole of, I mean, he was basically saying I have imposter syndrome, and I feel like the only way to mount that is to give a bunch of information, bunch of stats, bunch of data to sort of back up his stance. So definitely can bring him back on at some point and dig into that because I think as you get into your career, generally everyone feels that and tackles it differently. So just be interesting to hear from his perspective being on TV and on a network. It's definitely a different perspective that a lot of people don't have and seeing how he tackles it there.
Yeah, it's got to be really funky. I kind of found myself when I was explaining it back at the end because he has to show he belongs one for himself. I understand that constant fight, but he also has to keep the team's product in mind. And good entertainment has disagreement. Good entertainment is backed up by facts or like differing points in an argument. And he can fight to get all these points out, but I know he always has to operate with what does the viewer want to see or what is engaging. And that's got to be weird because he has to think about his own performance from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, and I think it's taking that audience perspective of like, what am I going to say that a viewer will remember? Because I mean, he might be on there for 10 minutes for that total, but they might remember one sentence he says or one point he makes. So like he thinks he has to get all this information out, but if he just says one good thing that sticks with a viewer, they're back for the next 5 shows or whatever. So it's like it's definitely a weird perspective to have. I mean, I kind of relate to it in a bit, just doing what I do and having to talk to clients and thinking that there's a little bit of imposter syndrome there because a lot of the people I'm talking to have been in the industry way longer than I have. But it's really just giving clients a story to tell to their clients. So it's very much a similar thing. Like everyone wants to sound smart. So yeah, it's about sports, but if he can give a one factoid to a fan and then that fan tells it to a friend at a bar that wasn't watching the show, they look incredible. So it's definitely interesting to hear.
Yeah, and it's so hard for me to get away from this point because I feel that so strongly with Flex Pro Grip. Like every time I talk to someone, I want to tell them everything that Flex Pro Grip can do instead of what he doesn't have the luxury of. Thankfully, I do or you do because we are front facing or can have that kind of face to face conversation with our clients or customers, whoever. We can find out what they're looking for and then give them the point or two that's important to them. Unfortunately, Lance, which I'm sure forces the waterfall effect a little bit, he's trying to get everything out there because he doesn't necessarily know what's going to stick or what is most important. And yeah, it's a battle that we fought for sure of just trying to tell people every single thing that Flex Pro Grip could help them with, as opposed to here's the thing that you are going to use this for and it'll change your life.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think it was interesting to hear the preparation part and him going down the rabbit hole, the draft one. I mean, I didn't even think about the difference in complexities of college players and where they play in the fields they play versus like minor leagues and major leagues being way easier in a sense. And I almost wanted to go down the rabbit hole. All right, now think as a college coach at a mid-level college having to recruit high schoolers. Like
Right.
there is even wider variety there. So it is a good perspective to take that. Even I mean, playing baseball my whole life, coaching these summer ball teams with high school kids, not even thinking of that.
Yeah, and it's a weird world because all the data that Lance deals with is standardized because it's all TrackMan, it's all Hawkeye, it's all the same data capture. So he knows what it means. And all the major league parks and minor league parks for that matter are roughly the same size, roughly the same dimensions. Yes, like if you want to be a jerk and throw Fenway in there and say, "Oh, that's way different," or Yankee Stadium's way smaller, they're all roughly the same. You go to any college field and you have no idea what you're going to get. You don't know if radars are calibrated properly. Some schools have TrackMan, some can't spell TrackMan. Like you don't know what data you are going to get from any of them. And as he was saying with like command stuff, how do you even grade that? Is the pitcher good or does his competition suck? And yeah, like that's pretty much like giving someone a book telling them, or I don't know, not even a book. That's like telling someone like, "Hey, you're going to have a history test. Study some history." And she's like, "What about history?" "No, just study it. You're going to have a test. You'll be fine."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and something we kind of glazed over that he made the point of, and it probably flew over the head of most listeners is he was talking about one player had 23-inch vertical ball flight off the bat and saying that like that's non-existence in the MLB. And he called up the coach or somebody, and they're like, "Well, you got to consider the baseball's different, and like that won't translate into the major leagues." Like people don't even think of that, and like he didn't even think of that, and that's his day to day. Like that's what he's studying all day, every day, and he didn't even think about. But he took the initiative to call somebody up, and they immediately like, yeah, think of this, and it was like, oh, okay,
Right. So what Lance did there is he admitted where he didn't understand something, which I think is a very valuable piece. I'm sure that's kind of what you were getting at. I apologize if I'm taking words out of your mouth or changing it a little bit, but that's how I kind of understand that is Lance is humble enough to admit that he didn't know something and he wants to make sure his audience is properly educated. So the only way that he can do that is if he is properly educated. Thus, he has to take on the thought experiment or call people that can assist him.
yeah, no, that is the point I was making. It was more of like not being afraid to be dumb or look dumb
Yeah.
and willing to make that phone call. That I think a lot of people aren't willing to make. And I'm glad we went into the prep area because I think a lot of people don't realize, like they see these social media influencers or they see these people on TV and they're like, oh, that's easy. You just get in front of a camera and you talk. It's like, yeah, kind of. But grab your phone and have a minute and a half script and video yourself. See how many takes it takes you to actually do that and execute it perfectly. Like honestly, a lot of props to people that go on TV and do these recordings. And I mean, actors, actresses that do movies and stuff. I can't even imagine how good their memory is or just how much work goes into that.
Yeah. Also, some of it is a lot of what he does is live or slightly pre-recorded. It's not like they're doing crazy edits. He needs to be on every single time that camera light flashes.
Yeah, no, and that's why I wanted to get more into the imposter syndrome because even from like experience doing meetings and stuff, like I can come out of a meeting and be like, wow, I just blew that. Like I did terrible. I didn't deliver the message that I wanted to. I rambled on, et cetera, et cetera. But then like everyone else is like, no, you did great. Or like a client's like, no, that's exactly what I need. And you're like, what? So it'd be interesting to hear his perspective on like a show that he thought that he didn't do well or felt like he wasn't
Mhm.
ready for, but actually was a really good show and he got good feedback on and just how he's learned from that.
Well, here's a point on that I actually learned not too long ago at the same conference actually that Lance mentioned at Wake Forest. The pitching coach at Arizona, his name's Kevin Vance, brought up a point that having an alter ego during performance doesn't only help you with your performance, it can help you analyze what you did. And the reasoning for that is because you have an alter ego when you perform, or in this case, when you step on the mound for Coach Kevin Vance, or for Lance when he's in front of the camera, or for us when we're presenting in a meeting, we can then step away and view that presentation as if it was done by somebody completely differently than ourselves. And separating ourselves from the equation then makes it easier to properly analyze what happened. I'm sure you are the exact same way that I am in the sense that I am going to be my own harshest critic at all times. But if I view somebody else or I'm watching somebody else, I'm probably going to be much more pragmatic about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of my stuff isn't recorded or like so I can't go back and watch it. It's just whatever feeling I had during the meeting and after, that's what it is. And I can't go back and be like, oh, that actually wasn't that bad. So I like the idea of the alter ego kind of piece, and I don't know how it would work in real time of the sense of just looking at it from the perspective of that happened. There's no recording, there's nothing you can watch going back. Where if you do have the recording, like when I'm prepping for stuff, obviously, like I'll pull out the voice memos on my phone and practice and then listen back to it that way. But in the actual meeting, like it's one and done, and I have no record of it most of the time. So it's definitely something that I didn't even think about doing an alter ego, so maybe I try that and see how that works from a live perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be able to separate, and maybe it helps if you're like a guy who gets nervous or an individual who gets nervous for these kind of situations. Yes, you can't go back and watch video on yourself or like do film analysis, but you could, I guess, in theory, still step away and just be like, all right, let's boil this down. Remove my emotion from it. Was the content displayed properly? Did the audience understand what I was trying to present? If the answer is yes to both of those, I probably did a pretty good job.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, well, I know we got a little bit away from Lance on that. Another thing that I want to go back to is I do find it impressive that he took a major, his college major, just as the vehicle to get where he wanted to go. And as soon as he had the exit lane, he's gone. Peace. See ya. I'm chasing the dream now.
Yeah, I think a lot of kids, I mean, I was even in this boat in college. Like you're 18 years old, you're leaving home for the first time. Like, hey, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Like choose a major and that's what you do. I mean, that's a hard decision to make. And I think a lot of kids make it based off what their parents do or what's the best paying career field and not really taking into account, okay, what does the day to day actually look like of that? I mean, I don't work in accounting, but I know I have other friends that went into accounting. I mean, outgoing personalities generally don't thrive in those situations because you are literally on spreadsheets and doing taxes, and you are working 60 to 80-hour work weeks, like Lance said. And I think it helps sometimes when you choose a field like accounting. I mean, he was at a Big Four, so he wasn't doing terrible for himself. So I think that gives him a little bit of extra flexibility in the sense of, okay, I'm good here. I don't have to stress about, I don't know, money or like losing my job because taxes are always going to be there. So I think it frees up some of your mind and be like, okay, what do I actually want to do? And I think a lot of people do figure it out post college. They actually figure out what they actually want to do instead of in college, where most people think they have to have their whole life figured out.
Yeah, for sure. And I I think it's neat that I guess once he did decide what he wanted to do, it's not like he was just like, "Oh, well, it's too late." Like, no, he went to grad school at one of the best journalism schools in the country. Like, yes, it probably took some pretty good grades to do that or a pretty decent resume, but why does a journalism school in Northwestern even care that his previous job experience is at a Big Four accounting? Maybe they just want diversity, and diversity means something greater than we often think it does. Like there can't be too many accountants that are going into that industry that are now professional baseball color analysts or player development analysts. He brings a different perspective than most people do. Like don't discount your experiences.
Well, yeah, and I mean, accounting and journalism, opposite ends of the spectrum. Like
Yeah.
one is very much like this is the answer and this is it, and then journalism very creative, like different thinking. So that, I mean, props to him for being able to thrive in both those areas because a lot of accountants can't have a creative side and a lot of creative people can't do numbers. I mean, it's props to him as well. I wanted to dive more. I know we were limited on time, but I did want to dive more into like either his upbringing or his parents, like what their thought process was. Cause I mean, a lot of parents would be very proud of their son. He's 23, 24 years old. He's at a Big Four accounting firm. Like they're probably pretty proud of him. And he probably came home at one point and had to have the conversation and say, this isn't for me. And I am going to journalism school. So it'd be interesting to hear that conversation or if there was support there or there wasn't and how that kind of came about.
Yeah, and another thing we didn't get into was the video editing work he did for Driveline Baseball. I tried to cover it quickly in the intro, but he has video editing experience too, and I'm pretty sure that was his first real work in the baseball world was helping out the leading baseball development company just edit their videos and help with some player data.
Did he play baseball?
High school,
Okay. I mean,
never beyond
that's
it.
yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive to be a color commentator, and analyst on a big, I mean, I would say a big network since it's like Chicago's
Massive
network.
network.
Yeah. And like you're the baseball guy and your only experience is high school baseball. I mean, we didn't get into that either in the sense of like it's more my perspective is more from the coaching side of like people always give props to, oh, he played Major League Baseball, so he's got to be a great coach. That's not always necessarily true. I mean, a lot of the guys that make it made it because they were just they had a gift and I mean they worked at it too, but like some of the stuff they were able to do, they don't know how to communicate like how they do it. So they're not actually good coaches where some coaches only have high school experience and they are very good at nurturing and teaching players how to get better using the skill sets that that player has. So I thought that was a good point that he made of like, it doesn't always necessarily need to be a Joe Girardi or a Cliff Floyd or somebody like that. Like sometimes you need these other people with different perspectives to bring in a different type of conversation to pull in more viewers.
Right. They get the job done a different way, a way that might be more relatable to the common fan or something that truthfully like we can do at home. What you were talking about with the coaching perspective, let's have the call back on the brothers we had on the podcast previously with Kevin and Dalton Guthrie. Like which one of them is a better coach? The one that played Major League Baseball or the one that recognized that his talent didn't match up for professional baseball and pursued helping others at a young age? I'm going to go with Kevin, the one that pursued helping others at a young age, versus Dalton, who's still playing professional baseball. Dalton's really good. Yeah, he worked really hard, but he's also really good. Kevin probably had to go about it a little bit of a different way.
Yeah, no, I mean that is a good example. And I didn't even think about those two. When you said brothers, I was like, who are you talking about?
The first
But
brothers on the podcast.
yeah, that's fair. They were different episodes. I was gonna make a point, but I can't remember. So you can go ahead. I can't remember what it was though.
No, I don't have too much else. I know we're gonna have Lance back on again in the future. Completely up to you if you want to keep riffing.
I can't remember. So no, I think I'm good. I mean, I do want to definitely like that 30 minutes with him flew by. Like
Oh
it was very quick. I mean, yes, he talked a lot, but that was the point. But yeah, that was a quick 30 minutes. We could have probably gone for 2 hours.
yeah. Isn't that weird how that's how most podcasts actually are? They have a guest come on for a really quick amount of time. You're like, oh my god, that's over already. I can't imagine doing an episode like that.
Yeah, I mean that's how you pump out episodes, though. I get it. Good for them.
That's right. Well, we look forward to having Lance back on in the future. Banko, this was fun. Just having our analysis. The second time we've done this, I actually like these after the fact riffs. So the first time we did it was on Brad's episode. Sadly, his phone died, so we were forced to do it for him. But this one, I guess we just backed our way into. Maybe we'll do this again in the future. I enjoy it. Just kind of running through our own interpretations of what the episode was about or what we drew from it. Any closing remarks?
No, I agree with you. I think we should do this more. Maybe it's not at the back of an episode. Maybe it is, depending on how short they are. Maybe it's a separate episode. But no, I think it was good, and I look forward to getting Lance back on eventually.
Yeah, we'll find a way. I know busy season will really pick up for him in March when spring training picks up. I'm sure he's going out to Arizona or something to do some special projects. But I guess thank you very much, Lance. Good luck to the Cubs. You thought of
I'm
it.
gonna interrupt you. I did think of it.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna lead us to anything. I was very tempted to make a joke, because about like the random stats that people throw out, like a guy born on January 6th with at 352. I wanted to go down that rabbit hole, just make that joke of letting him like give the most absurd stat that he's ever thrown out there on a broadcast.
Oh, he's that guy though.
Yeah, no, I know he is.
I had a 7 hour drive with him one time from Winston-Salem, North Carolina to Nashville. And just listening to him pull facts and statistics out about players is one of the most interesting things to witness.
I mean, that could honestly be an episode. Just be like, all right, let's go down the random fact rabbit hole. All I could think of though was the Ollie episode and Ollie making the joke on his episode, and like I
Yeah, that
wanted
would
to
have been a
jump into
perfect
something.
follow up. Yeah, that's Lance is that guy though. He's full of those.
Got it. Yeah, we'll definitely go down that rabbit hole next time he's on.
For sure. Well, again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Listen to Banko's outro. We'll catch you next time.
Hi everyone, Grant here. Thanks for tuning into the show. If you could like, share, and subscribe, we'd greatly appreciate it. Also, if you think you or someone you know has a good life story to tell, we are always open to guest suggestions. You can send those suggestions to our email, tworkpod@gmail.com. Thanks again for the support.